If you've been to the grocery store lately, then no doubt you've noticed that there are more and more organic food options available, whether that's peppered up and down the conventional food items in the center of the store, or maybe over in the produce section where there's a great big section now growing with organic options, or whether it's up and down the bread aisle where Dave's Killer Bread has made a big statement of arrival, right? There's a whole section just dedicated to it. So these organic food options are becoming more and more of a staple in grocery foods and store chains across the world because consumers are becoming more and more educated about food safety and productions and more conscientious about the things that they are putting inside their body. So brands like Amy's and Nature's Path and Organic Valley are popping up and taking America by storm. And meanwhile, mainstream brands like Kraft and Nestle are hustling to introduce lines that are meeting their consumers' demands. In 2018, worldwide organic food and drink sales surpassed $100 billion, and $17 billion of that was here in the US market. So what is all the hype behind organic food? I mean, is it really as good for you as they say it is? And is it worth the investment of your hard-earned dollars? So to find out, today, let's take a look at the health dangers associated with conventional food production, how organic food is produced, the options that you have, and then some easy tips for healthier eating that you can apply today. Let's start by talking about the health risks associated with pesticides. We know that over £1 billion of pesticides are used in the United States of America every single year, and that's out of an approximate amount of 5.6 billion pounds of pesticides that are used worldwide. So we're consuming and using about a sixth of them. And the problem is not necessarily here in the States, but in many developing countries, programs to control the exposure to the toxins that they're spraying are limited or non-existent, which means that their agricultural production is a very unsafe procedure for them. Now, these pesticides are used in farming because they're designed to kill the bugs that destroy the crops, but we also see them in our homes every time we use pest control, and we're also exposed to them usually wherever we go because pest control is used in most of the public venues that we attend, right? Whether it's a public park or the grocery store that we go to. Now, we know that pesticides are bad for your nervous system. Every year I spend about 4 days at the Integrative Medicine for Mental Health conference listening to the best and the brightest minds on the subject of mental health. In 2019, in our first lecture, Dr. William Shaw jumped right in with the topic, the role of toxic chemicals in neurological and psychiatric disorders. And within 2 slides, he was discussing the impact of pesticides on depression in the human brain. He continued to talk about their role in autism, in aggressive behavior, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. On day 2, we listened to an entire lecture on the disturbing implications of pesticides in brain health. Dr. Pizzorno, who's a naturopath, showed us that exposure to pesticides can lead to a 32% increase in the risk of Alzheimer's disease and an increased risk of Parkinson's disease. For every 1 microgram per liter of total pesticides there are in the groundwater, the risk of Parkinson's disease is increased by 3%. Research even shows that pesticides in the surrounding environment can increase the risk of the development of Parkinson's. For example, when you have your home sprayed with bugs or if you use Roundup on your weeds in the backyard. He demonstrated too that the combination of elevated blood sugar and toxic exposure is the source of diabetes. Your nervous system is the only tissue in your body that doesn't replicate except for your olfactory nerves. All the other ones have to regenerate. So anything that damages your nervous system will ultimately damage your health. And we see this in people who eat pesticides. Communication in your nervous system takes place between something called your neurotransmitters. Your most predominant neurotransmitter is called acetylcholine. For your body to cycle and create new neurotransmitters, you have to use acetylcholine esterase to wipe the slate clean. Otherwise, acetylcholine will just accumulate in the synaptic cleft. And that's what you can see here in this slide. You can see the gap there, that's the synaptic cleft. It will build up in there, and then communication between those two neurons using the neurotransmitters becomes very, very difficult. These are essential for memory, recall, and very quick thinking. Pesticides are acetylcholine esterase inhibitors. And while that sounds like a really big word, all it means is that when acetylcholine accumulates in your nervous system, and it can't be erased because the pesticides are preventing that from happening, your nervous system gets thrown way off. We also know that there is this significant correlation between your gut health and your brain health. Happy bellies equal happy brains. Pesticides kill off all living organisms and herbicides kill the bacteria on the crops. Now your digestive tract is just chock full of beneficial living organisms and bacteria that are required for a happy, healthy mind. They are threatened and harmed when you consume pesticides and herbicides. No bacteria, very few neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine that help to keep your mood in a happy and stable place. And if that weren't enough of an overload for your nervous system, we also know that the heavy metals that are found in pesticides and fungicides cause damage to nerve function, contribute to multiple sclerosis, lower your IQ, and cause anemia by blocking hemoglobin production. The next thing we know is that pesticides are bad for our heart and lungs, and this is because they are designed to stop an insect's heart and lung muscles from doing their job, which results in suffocation and a heart attack for the bug. When you are exposed to pesticides on your produce and in the air you breathe, then your body has to process them too. These environmental pollutants are fat soluble, so they get stored up in all your fatty tissue. Do a little bit of thinking for just a moment. The most fatty organ inside your body is your brain. It's 70% fat. As all this exposure builds up, we're subjected to these same effects on our heart and our lungs. So anyone who's dealing with heart or lung disease should plan on eating an organic diet, which drastically reduces the number of pesticides that their body has to process. We also know that pesticides and herbicides are bad for our energy production. Chemicals used in agriculture like paraquat, parathion, Dynaseb, and 2,4-D may hurt your mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of your cells. They do this by increasing the membrane permeability. That exposes them. It means they're not got tight sealed junctions and they're exposed to free radical damage, which inhibits the coupling necessary for energy production. We also know that these herbicides and pesticides are bad for your fat cells. We just talked about that a moment ago, about our brain. It's made of a 60% fat, 70% fat, and we're exposing it to all these toxic chemicals that are stored there. But we know that the insecticides endolcifan and the herbicide paraquat oxidize fat molecules and may cause damage to the phospholipid component of your cells. Well, what's the big deal with that? Well, it's because phospholipids make up the skin that surrounds every living cell inside your body. The most vulnerable of those tissues in your body are your gastrointestinal tract, your lungs, your kidneys, your heart and blood vessels, and your liver. We also know that pesticides are bad for your inflammation levels. So conventional meats contain stress hormones because the animals are terrorized at slaughter. They're fed plastic pellets for fiber, they're fed manure, they're fed other animal waste when they're in these confined animal feed operations. They also eat genetically modified crops and crops sprayed with pesticides. Now, when we consume the meat from those animals, it adds to our inflammation and increases our stress. Unless you think that farmed fish is a safer alternative, it's not. Things like salmon are fed something called a chemical called samophan, and it's designed to turn their flesh pink. When they're in those big farm situations, they aren't getting the feed that they would get in their natural habitat that would turn their flesh pink. So they're fed this chemical. Well, that chemical is banned in the UK for causing cancer. We also have done animal studies on different herbicides and pesticides, including some like endrin and fenthion, that overstimulate the enzymes involved in chemical signaling in your body, which can result in atherosclerosis, which is when your arteries get all clogged up. It's implicated in psoriasis and other inflammatory conditions. And if it's bad for you on all of these levels, then we know that it is really bad for our kids. And that's because they're little people and all these toxic chemicals are just concentrated inside their little bodies. Studies have shown that the chemicals associated with conventional crop production might be more concentrated in children, and some are known to be neurotoxic and may damage a baby's developing brain and nervous system. It may also impact kids more during times of growth and breast development, just because they're more susceptible to the effects during those times. A study on the use of acetylcholine esterase inhibitors in Colombia between 2002 and 2005 showed an increase in the prevalence of abnormal values of acetylcholine esterase inhibitor activity that necessitated a lowering of use and commercialization of high-risk pesticides and a need for developing safer methods for pest control management. They recognized that if they wanted smarter kids in school, they needed to curb the use of chemically based farming methods. The Department of Environmental Health, the School of Public Health at Harvard University in Boston, showed that children with higher levels than detectable concentrations of pesticides had twice the odds of ADHD compared with children with undetectable levels. Their findings support the hypothesis that organophosphate exposure at levels common among American children might contribute to ADHD prevalence. Prospective studies are needed to see whether or not that association is actually causal. In 1996, Congress passed a law here saying that all pesticides applied to food must be safe for children to consume. The question really is, what's a safe level of pesticide for a child? Also know that these things are bad for your weight. How many times are we going to say we also know? Here's another system that this just impacts and damages. We know that these pesticides also disrupt your hormones and your endocrine system. So atrazine is a pesticide that's used by farmers, particularly those growing corn across North America for more than half a century. And so this has resulted in atrazine entering our lakes, our streams, and then eventually our drinking water supplies. Today, it's considered the #1 contaminant in U.S. drinking water. In 1996, the Environmental Working Group found that 96% of the water taken from 748 towns contained atrazine and at least 20 other pesticides. Now, there's still so much research to be done on atrazine's impact on the human body, but preliminary studies, notably from the University of California, Berkeley, showed that it increases the risk of obesity and several different types of cancer, including ovarian, breast, and prostate. It's also been linked to serious birth defects, such as smaller male genitals and gastroschisis, a condition where a baby's intestines are outside their abdomen during development and birth. According to a study done by a team of scientists from the Danish Institute of Agricultural Sciences, aided by a Newcastle University scientist, rats fed organic produce were slimmer, they slept better, and they had a stronger immune system than those fed conventionally grown foods. So all of this leads us to the big question, right? If all of these things are so bad for us, then what can we do? And the simple answer is to purchase USDA certified organic foods. Now, organic foods cannot by definition contain any genetically modified organisms, and they avoid most of the nasty herbicides and pesticides that will make you sick as well. So let's take a moment and just talk about genetically modified, genetically engineered. I think bio-designed is the new phrase that they use for these things. USDA organic labels and the non-GMO butterfly are the only way to ensure that you are not eating genetically modified, genetically engineered, or bio-designed foods or cloned foods. GMOs now make up 30% of our cropland here in America. Genetically modified organisms are created when scientists genetically engineer crops with DNA from bacteria, viruses, or other plants and animals. They do this in an attempt to make them grow bigger, faster, and to withstand the direct application of herbicides, or to actually produce insecticides themselves. They're also antibiotic resistant. They don't just affect what we eat, they affect the environment as well. That technology has been in development now for over 30 years. The field is led by companies like Monsanto and DuPont and Syngenta, and they're also the companies that are responsible for creating products like Agent Orange, DDT, and Roundup. There are growing bodies of evidence that suggests that genetically modified or engineered foods are unsafe for us to eat. Most developed nations do not consider GMO or GE foods to be safe, and the food on the US dinner table is banned in nearly 60 countries. Leading reports show that GMO food disrupts our gut bacteria, leads to chronic inflammation, which can in turn cause cancer, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, gluten intolerance, depression and anxiety, and infertility, to name just a few. As much as 80% of the conventionally processed foods that you find in your grocery store today, the things that are up and down the major aisles, contain genetically modified organisms or are genetically engineered or bio-designed. Now, there are grassroots movements out there that are beginning to demand that those foods containing GMOs are labeled so that we can make educated choices about the foods that we eat. Not surprisingly, the big biotech companies see no need to label their foods or even test for their safety. In fact, they spend millions of dollars every year just to make sure that labeling doesn't take place. The top genetically modified products that you might want to avoid are yellow corn, soy, cotton, canola oil, sugar, aspartame, zucchini, yellow squash, and papaya. And then we also know that conventional milk may contain growth hormones which can harm your human body. The Non-GMO Project is a non-profit organization that supports efforts to provide foods that don't contain genetically modified ingredients. So the Non-GMO Project certifies a company's product as GMO-free and provides a verification label. Now, when you're shopping for organic products, there are 5 labels that you want to look out for. The first one is easy. It's 100% organic. Everything inside that package is an organic item. The second one is the USDA organic seal. That one has ingredients in it that are at least 95% organic. And that's fine because things like salt aren't organic. So that way they can include them in there and still be covered by that USDA organic seal. The next one is you might see that it's made with organic ingredients. And that means that 70% of the ingredients inside the product have to be organic. And if there's less than 70% of the ingredients in there, then those items will be labeled individually on the back of the packet. So when you look at your ingredient label, you'll be able to see where it says contains organic wheat and milk, but maybe the corn is not organic at all. The next thing I want to tell you about are these stickers that you get on your produce at the store. So you'll see here in front of you 3 different labels. On a normal piece of fruit, a conventional piece of fruit that's grown in a traditional way, you'll see those 4 numbers. So here on a Granny Smith apple, that number is 4139. If that Granny Smith apple has been grown organically, then they will put a number 9 at the beginning of it. So you would see the code 94139. If it was a genetically modified Granny Smith apple, then it would have an 8 in front of it, 84139. Now, in truth, those numbers they're not enforced. Nobody mandates them to put those stickers on there. So technically, if you were in a grocery store and all they sold was organic bananas, then they could just stick the 4011 code on there, and that's all that you would see. And nobody anywhere uses this 8 code on any of the produce, mostly because grocers don't want to use it, because consumers are so aware of genetically modified, genetically engineered, bioengineered foods that they don't often want to buy those. And so when they advertise it, that it's got an 8 on there and it's genetically engineered, then they will not buy it, and they'll end up with the grocer will end up with a store full of produce that's going bad. The last thing to note is when it comes to Hawaiian papayas, there is nothing but genetically modified available. And when you go to the store, you may well see a regular code on there that just has the Hawaiian papaya code on it without a number 8. And so it is very difficult to actually find papaya that is not genetically modified. So the labeling doesn't always follow through, but you can look at it and get a really good idea of what is organic and what's conventional at least. So let's take a moment to look at how organic meats are produced. We know they're produced by feeding animals food that is in keeping with their natural diet, and they're also allowed time in their natural habitats. They only eat conventional feed in a state of emergency when their food has been contaminated. Growth hormones and growth promoters are prohibited. They're not allowed to be fed plastic pellets. They must eat food that is organically produced. Prohibitions on their food include drugs in the absence of illness. They're not allowed to be given hormones to support their growth. They don't get supplements in any amount above those needed for adequate nutrition. The use of mammal or poultry slaughter byproducts for feed is not allowed. Neither is excessive use of feed additives. And they don't routinely administer synthetic parasiticides either. They must provide conditions to maintain and promote the health and welfare of their livestock. That includes sufficient nutritional rations, appropriate housing, pasture and sanitation conditions, conditions that allow them to exercise, have freedom of movement, and minimize the stress of the animals. Then they have to have administration of veterinary care, of course. They must be organically managed under continuous organic management from at least the last third of gestation or hatching, or no later than the second day of life for poultry. Any milk or milk products must be from animals that have been under continuous organic management beginning no later than 1 year before milk production begins. So that's our organic meat, but what about organic produce? Well, these things are foods that are grown and prepared without the use of most synthetic hormones and fertilizers. They don't use sewer sludge fertilizers, genetic engineering, growth hormones, ionizing radiation, antibiotics, artificial chemicals, including pesticides and herbicides, but they do utilize crop rotation, covering crops to prevent the soils from eroding, planting special crops that are sown back into the ground to fertilize it, the addition of aged animal manures and plant wastes in the form of compost. It's all done to promote biodiversity with the intent to integrate cultural, biological, and mechanical practices to promote the cycling of resources and ecological balance. Why buy organic? If you weren't convinced already, it's because I can't stress this enough. When you vote with your dollars, you influence the people at the top of the food chain. When it comes down to it, those big food giants are rarely concerned with your physical well-being. They're concerned with their bottom line. As the consumer, it's your responsibility to figure out what's in your food. Now, organic food is crucial not just because of what it contains, but because of what it doesn't contain. It doesn't contain as many pesticides or herbicides, artificial hormones or antibiotics. It doesn't contain heavy metals like lead or mercury, benzene or toluene. Did you know that 70% of the antibiotics we produce end up in the animals we eat, as well as synthetic growth hormones? That high use of antibiotics contributes to antibiotic-resistant bacteria that are so prevalent in our society today. A vote with your dollars has the potential to reduce the abundance of infection caused by the overuse of antibiotics in our livestock. Organic meat and wild-caught meats are higher in beta-carotene, vitamin E, vitamin B, calcium, magnesium, potassium, omega-3s, cancer fighters, and are lower in saturated fat. Organic produce is higher in 119 nutritive properties. Your conventional produce 5-a-days don't meet your recommended daily allowance of vitamins and minerals, but organic will. Organically treated soil has microorganisms that help break down the minerals into usable forms that make them available to the roots, which might explain why organic crops have a higher mineral content. We also know that they're better for the planet. They promote healthy ecosystems and they produce thriving, diverse habitats. They also support the livelihoods of independent farmers and they provide far healthier conditions for the farm workers. Organic foods can also help to protect against chronic inflammation in cardiovascular disease and colon cancer. Organic soups are 6 times the amount of salicylic acid inside them, which has been shown to prevent arteries from hardening. The average level in 11 brands of soup was 117 nanograms compared to 20 in the non-organic soups. 4 of the conventional soups had no detectable levels whatsoever. Organic food also reduces the toxic load on your liver and cells. Animal studies and one human study showed a trend of better functions such as reproduction and resistance to infection when they were eating organically grown foods. Organic food has a better flavor and it's often sweeter. The flavor is a result of an increase in mineral content in the produce. Conventionally grown foods use nitrate fertilizers that causes the food to just suck up all of this water, but they don't have any more nutrients. So the foods are just great, big, and watery, and they don't taste very good, and they have very little nutritional value. In the years that I've been studying and using these principles, I've been asked two major questions. The first one is, aren't all of the organic produce that we buy, isn't it all grown on fields next to ones that use pesticides? And doesn't that mean that some of their pesticides end up on the organic produce? Well, organic foods are not 100% free from pesticides, but they have a greatly reduced number of pesticides on them, even from the overspray. In fact, it might surprise you to learn that organic farmers actually still have access to some synthetic pesticides. But the difference is that organic farmers are only allowed to use 25 synthetic pesticides if they have completely exhausted their mechanical, cultural, biological, and natural material methods, and they haven't been able to solve the problem. When we compare that to the 900 plus synthetic pesticides that are available to conventional farmers, we can see that that number is greatly reduced. Consumers can markedly reduce their intake of pesticide residues and their exposure to antibiotic-resistant bacteria by choosing organic produce and meat, according to researchers at Stanford University who reviewed a massive body of scientific studies on the much debated issue. That information came from the Environmental Working Group. It's not about removing pesticides at this point, it really isn't. It's about reducing them as much as we can. This doesn't just apply to our food production, it applies to our everyday environmental exposure as well. The second question that I get asked all the time is, well, don't organic foods perish more quickly, and doesn't that drive up the cost? And yes, they do perish more quickly because organic materials are designed to break down. If your produce is in your fridge and it's not deteriorating within a week, then there's probably something sprayed all over it that you don't want to eat. We intervene in that natural breakdown process when we spray them with fungicides and antibacterial chemicals, these same chemicals that cause cancer, reproductive harm, and disrupt our endocrine systems. However, if you store your stuff properly and with proper planning for your grocery shops, we know that that waste can be reduced greatly. It's always less expensive to buy organic food than it is to manage chronic disease. To wrap up today, I want to leave you with some quick tips that are going to help you when you take your next trip to the grocery store or prepare your next meal. The first thing you need to know is you can't really wash those pesticides off of your fruit and vegetables. They soak through the skin of most produce and into the flesh, so just buy organic. You should still plan on washing your organic produce just to remove any potentially harmful organisms like soil and bacteria from them. You can do that by rinsing your salad greens under running water or putting them to soak in a sink full of clean water before you dry them with a salad spinner. You can use a scrub brush for hard-skinned fruits and vegetables like melons and oranges, and a softer one for things like summer squash. You can wash fragile fruits like berries in a colander and toss them gently, but if you want to avoid them spoiling, wash them right before you intend to eat them, because otherwise they'll just go bad in the fridge. We know that wax is applied to the produce after it's already been washed, and if you want to get that off, just use a peeler, don't use a knife. There are tons of brilliant nutrients right below the surface of the fruit's peel or the vegetable's peel, and when you use a knife, you'll cut down too deep and you'll take out all those beautiful nutrients. Go easy on the use of detergents, those produce detergents, because they can upset your tummy if you overdo it. You can exhaust your local options like a farmer's market, community-supported farm, roadside food stands. They have lots of local producers that don't have enough money to get USDA certified organic, but they might be using really clean agricultural methods, and you can learn that when you talk to them. You can also become part of a community supported agricultural program. Local farms that don't use pesticides or herbicides but might not be labeled organic come together, they sell their produce online, and then you can pick it up at a produce drop. You can shop online for organic at a more affordable price. And then you can use the environmental working groups list, the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. If your budget is a concern, you can look on there to see what are the most and least pesticide covered foods and choose conventional if they don't have a lot of pesticides on them. But I will say in that list, corn is nearly always genetically modified, so I would suggest buying that organically. Finally, just to stick with organic, those things are usually grown in season. So when you eat in season, you're supporting organic agriculture as well. So in the spring, focus on your nice light leafy greens. In the summer, those light cooling foods like strawberries and apples and pears and peppermint. In the autumn, you want to focus on those more warming foods like carrots and sweet potatoes, onions and ginger and garlic. And in winter, the warming foods that take longer to grow, things like the root vegetables, a lot of our meats fall in that category, carrots, potatoes, onions, garlic, rutabaga, beets, that sort of thing. Hopefully you can see from today's class that getting behind organic food production is worth the investment of your hard-earned dollars. It's an investment in the health of you, your family, your farm workers, local farm workers, the animals, and the planet. When you choose conventional food, you take a gamble with your long-term health and you increase the risk of cancer, diabetes, heart and lung disease, and mental health concerns. While choosing organic doesn't guarantee safety, it goes a long way towards safeguarding your health. You should leave today feeling empowered to make better decisions that impact your well-being, decisions that you can share with your friends and your neighbors, and cast your vote for a better planet and a better life.